There are some moments in history that are so dark, so catastrophic that they defy easy explanation. They stand as a permanent, jagged wound in the human story, a terrifying testament to the depths of our cruelty and the terrifying fragility of civilization itself. The Holocaust is one such moment. For decades we have tried to make sense of it, to contain it within a narrative of gas chambers, of a few monstrous leaders, and of a chapter of history that is now firmly closed. But in his essential and deeply researched book, The Holocaust, An Unfinished History, the historian Dan Stone argues that this understanding is dangerously incomplete. He makes the powerful case that the Holocaust is not a story that is sealed in the past. It is a story whose full, horrifying truth is still being uncovered, and whose profound and difficult lessons are more urgent today than ever before. This will not be an easy journey, but it is a necessary one. This is a philosophical inquiry into the anatomy of humanity's darkest chapter. It is an act of remembrance, and it is a search for the vital warnings that history has left for us, if we have the courage to look. Beyond the gates of Auschwitz, the true scale of the horror. When we think of the Holocaust, a single powerful image often comes to mind: the gates of Auschwitz. We think of an industrialized, assembly line process of murder, carried out with bureaucratic efficiency in a handful of infamous death camps. This picture is true, and it is horrifying. But Dan Stone's first crucial argument is that this is only half of the story. To understand the full scale of the catastrophe, we must look beyond the gates of the well-known camps in Poland. The Holocaust was not just an industrialized process, it was a continent-wide event. It was a sprawling, chaotic, and often deeply personal campaign of violence that stretched from the villages of France to the forests of Ukraine, from the islands of Greece to the shores of Norway. Crucially, Stone emphasizes the importance of what historians now call the Holocaust by bullets. While millions were murdered in the gas chambers of camps like Auschwitz and Treblinka, roughly half of all victims of the Holocaust were killed in other ways. They were shot face to face and buried in mass graves in the forests, fields, and ravines of Eastern Europe. This was the work of the Einsatzgruppen, the mobile killing squads that followed the German army as it invaded the Soviet Union. This is a vital and horrifying correction to our collective memory. The killing was not always anonymous and remote. It was often intimate. It was neighbors killing neighbors. It was German police officers and their local collaborators, standing on the edge of a pit for hours, shooting men, women, and children one by one. Understanding this Holocaust by bullets forces us to confront a more difficult truth. The genocide was not just the work of a few fanatical SS officers in a distant camp. It required the active participation and complicity of hundreds of thousands of people, all across the European continent. It was not a secret, hidden operation, it was a public spectacle of mass murder. The anatomy of a perpetrator beyond the monster. This leads to one of the most difficult philosophical questions of the 20th century. Who were the perpetrators? How could so many people become complicit in such an immense crime? Our natural instinct is to imagine them as monsters, as inhuman sadists who were born evil. And while there were certainly many of those, Dan Stone, drawing on decades of historical research, paints a more complex and, in some ways, more disturbing picture. The book moves beyond the simple caricature of a few evil leaders like Hitler and Himmler. It shows that the Holocaust was made possible by a vast and complex machinery of state, a bureaucracy that was staffed not by monsters but by ordinary men. These were the civil servants in Berlin who organized the train schedules that sent millions to their deaths. These were the local police battalions, made up of middle-aged working-class men who were not fanatical Nazis, but who, through a combination of peer pressure, careerism, and a brutal dehumanization of their victims, became efficient mass murderers. Stone explores the motivations of these perpetrators. For some, it was a deep-seated, fanatical anti-Semitism. For many others, the motivations were more mundane and therefore more chilling. Greed was a massive factor. The Holocaust was, among other things, the largest theft of property in history. All across Europe, people eagerly participated in the plunder of their Jewish neighbors' homes and businesses. For others, it was about career advancement, about showing their superiors that they were tough and reliable. And crucially, the book emphasizes the role of collaboration. The Nazis could not have carried out the Holocaust on their own. In almost every country they occupied, from France to Lithuania, they found willing local collaborators, local police forces, fascist movements, and ordinary citizens who were eager to help them round up and murder their Jewish neighbors. the Holocaust was not just a German crime, it was a European crime. By showing us the complex and varied anatomy of the perpetrator, Stone's work forces us to abandon the comforting idea that the killers were a different species from us. It forces us to confront the terrifying reality that under certain conditions of state-sanctioned hatred, of powerful ideology, and of social pressure, ordinary people can be convinced to participate in extraordinary evil. The fullness of a life, seeing the victims. In the face of this overwhelming machinery of death, it is easy for the victims to become a faceless statistic, 6 million. But Dan Stone's unfinished history is a powerful act of resistance against this very dehumanization. He implores us to see the victims not as a monolithic block, but as 6 million individuals, from thousands of different, vibrant and complex Jewish communities, each with its own rich history, culture and language. The book takes us on a tour of this lost world. We see the sophisticated, secular and highly assimilated Jewish communities of cities like Berlin and Vienna. We see the traditional Yiddish-speaking world of the shtetls in Poland and Lithuania. We see the ancient Sephardic Jewish communities in Greece. Before the Holocaust, Europe was home to an incredible diversity of Jewish life. Stone makes a crucial point. The victims were not just religious Jews. They were doctors, lawyers, scientists, artists, factory workers, and farmers. They were communists and conservatives, Zionists and assimilationists. They were mothers, fathers, sons, and daughters. The Nazis' murderous ideology did not care about these differences. It reduced this vast and complex tapestry of human life to a single, hateful, biological category. By painting a picture of the richness and diversity of the world that was lost, Stone performs a vital act of historical and philosophical justice. He reminds us that the true measure of the tragedy is not just in the number of the dead, but in the immense, unquantifiable loss of culture, of knowledge, of potential, and of 6 million unique and irreplaceable human worlds. The courage to resist, a war on two fronts. One of the most persistent and damaging myths about the Holocaust is that its victims went to their deaths passively, like lambs to the slaughter. The unfinished history provides a powerful and comprehensive corrective to this idea, detailing the many and varied forms of Jewish resistance. There was, of course, armed resistance. The most famous example is the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising of 1943, where a small, poorly armed group of Jewish fighters held off the technologically superior German army for nearly a month. It was a battle with no hope of victory, but it was a profound and powerful statement, a choice to die on their feet rather than to live on their knees. But the Warsaw Uprising was not the only one. Stone details the stories of armed resistance in numerous other ghettos, and the uprisings that took place even within the death camps of Treblinka and Sobibor. But armed resistance was not the only or even the most common form of defiance. Stone places a powerful emphasis on what he and other historians call spiritual resistance. This was the daily, courageous struggle to maintain one's humanity and dignity in a system that was designed to completely erase it. Spiritual resistance took many forms. It was the secret schools that were organized in the ghettos to continue the education of children. It was the secret archives like the Oneg Shabbat archive in Warsaw, where historians and writers worked tirelessly to document the reality of their lives, to ensure that their story would be told by them, not by their murderers. It was the secret religious services held in the barracks of Auschwitz. It was the act of keeping a diary, of writing a poem, of drawing a picture. It was the simple, defiant act of a mother comforting her child. It was any act that affirmed life and humanity in the face of a machine of death and dehumanization. By detailing these acts of courage, Stone shows that the victims were not just passive objects of Nazi policy. They were active historical agents, men and women who, even in the most unimaginably horrific circumstances, made choices, fought back, and struggled to preserve their identity and their dignity to the very end. An unfinished history, the legacy, and the warning. Why does Dan Stone call this an unfinished history? He does so for two reasons. The first is a matter of historical scholarship. For decades after the war, the story of the Holocaust was suppressed in the communist countries of Eastern Europe, where the majority of the crimes took place. It is only since the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 that archives have been opened and historians have been able to fully explore the history of these communities. The work of uncovering the names, the stories, and the specific details of the Holocaust in places like Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania is still ongoing. The history is literally still being written. But the second reason is a much deeper, more philosophical one. The history of the Holocaust is unfinished because its legacy is still with us. It has profoundly shaped our modern world. The very concept of genocide and the body of international law designed to prevent it, like the Nuremberg trials and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, were all born directly from the ashes of the Holocaust. And the history is unfinished because the forces that made the Holocaust possible, racism, nationalism, the dehumanization of the other, the assault on truth, the willingness of ordinary people to be complicit in extraordinary evil, have not disappeared from the world. The specter of genocide has returned in places like Cambodia, Rwanda, and Bosnia, and the ideologies of anti-Semitism and white supremacy are once again on the rise in many parts of the world. The final powerful message of the Holocaust and unfinished history is that studying this dark chapter is our profound and permanent human responsibility. It is not about wallowing in horror for its own sake, it is about learning to recognize the warning signs. It is about understanding the political and psychological mechanisms that allow a society to descend into madness. It is an act of vigilance. It is a promise to the victims that we will not forget, and a promise to our children that we will do everything in our power to ensure that it never happens again. It is a deep and difficult inquiry into what it means to be a responsible human being in a fragile world. If you believe that we must confront the darkest parts of our history to build a better future, then you are in the right place. Welcome to Geeky Philosopher. Subscribe and join us in the vital work of remembering.